Okay, so I have put a few dot points at the top of each lecture, or each set of slides really. So these are just kind of clarifying what dot points are found in the VCA study guide. So I'm pretty sure the study guide is going to be the same for this year. I think this is the final year that this current study design is being used. So really make sure you're on top of these things. I always tell my students to print out the study design. Like I printed out just the dot points. You do the whole entire booklet. It's kind of a lot. But if you print out the dot points and laminate it and maybe like get like a little whiteboard marker and tick it off as you work through it, I found that really useful, and something about just like ticking off a particular area of study just felt really satisfying to me. It kind of motivated me to study. So we will go into study tips and stuff at the end, but yeah, just I find printing out the study design to be really useful. Being able to tick it off, laminate it like that, and just have it on your wall or at your desk or something like that, I just think is really useful. Anyway, so for movement skills. So the classification of movement skills including fundamental movement skills, sport-specific skills, open and closed skills, gross and fine skills, and discrete, serial, and continuous motor skills. This area of study I don't find too difficult. I feel like it's quite like approachable for all students. The main thing that kind of trips people up is that it's done right at the start of the year generally. A lot of my students, we all did it at the start of the year. So it's something that's like quite easy to forget, especially with all these words which kind of sound similar, like discrete, serial, and continuous, sport specific, open, closed, gross, fine. Like they kind of like make sure you're really on top of distinguishing what they mean. And this is where I find flashcards really useful. So I used to use handwritten flashcards in high school. I've now switched to using like Anki and making some flashcards on my like iPad on GoodNotes and things. So I just find them really useful for kind of making sure that you stay on top of things that you've studied previously. Or you can just make flashcards in like Word and then print them out, which I also find quite useful. Or even just looking up like a flashcard generator online. Anyway, okay, let's get into the actual content. So it's really important that you guys do develop an ability to kind of distinguish between all these things and kind of just explain what they are just off the bat without looking at notes. So that would be what I'm really like aspiring for as a student in year 12 or year 11 doing year 12 PE. So really be able to define what fundamental movement skills are. That's a really common exam question, so that's usually worth 1 point in an exam. So these are basic skills that allow individuals to develop sport-specific skills later on. They include things such as walking, running, and throwing. You can actually build upon these skills. So for example, you could build upon throwing and like lead to a more advanced skill such as like pitching. So it is like a variant of a throw, but it's kind of more advanced. And so you really need this fundamental skill of throwing in order to actually then move on and like kind of graduate to pitch, right? So it's kind of the importance of fundamental movement skills. So kind of being able to distill that kind of information into like one sentence would be really useful for your exam. Or your SAC. So open motor skills, these are skills performed in an unpredictable environment. So things such as like whitewater rafting or surfing, you can't really control the environment. Closed motor skills are also performed in predictable environments. VCA also really likes the phrase self-paced. So closed motor skills are performed in predictable and self-paced environments, whereas open ones are in unpredictable and non-self-paced environments. Yeah, so I just kind of think open, like the open land is kind of more wild than like a closed structure whereby, you know, if you're just performing a free throw in basketball or a free kick or something in soccer, it's really self-paced. No one can like snatch the ball from you. You really got control there. And there's no like unfamiliar weather conditions that are just gonna like disrupt the game. Gross motor skills. These involve the use of large muscle groups, such as in running. Swimming is also another really good one. Whereas fine motor skills involve the use of smaller muscles or smaller groups, such as like using your fingers to move a chess piece or throwing a dart. So hopefully that's kind of clear. Then we've got discrete, serial, and continuous motor skills. It'd be a really good idea to kind of memorize what these three things are. I wouldn't say memorize it word by word, but just know what they are. Because they're often like written in conjunction in an exam, like distinguish what this is, or describe what a discrete motor skill is, or compare these things. So knowing them really well is a good idea. So a discrete motor skill has a clear beginning and end. So throwing a ball. Once the ball is like out of your hands, it's quite clear that that skill has finished. Serial motor skills are a combination of discrete motor skills performed together. So things such as a gymnastics routine and a dance routine are really good examples. I often get students asking about other examples, like perhaps triple jump could be one, but there are many others which I would probably just stay away from, because VCA does make clear that gymnastics and dancing are very clearly serial motor skill acts, I guess, and so I don't know, I think deviating from this can make it a bit tricky for the examiner. It might be a bit unsure. So I think just staying with safe ones such as gymnastics or dancing is probably the best way to go. Continuous motor skills have no clear beginning or end. So running, swimming, and cycling are the main ones here. So I wouldn't really try and put anything else down on the exam. Remember that you won't get points for a better answer. If you just take the most simplistic answer, if it's correct, you will get the same marks as someone who picks a harder answer. So just go for what's easiest, and generally what is more commonly seen on the exam, as that will be something that VCA examiners are more familiar with. Oh, my laptop is frozen. What's going on? So our next dot point is really talking about influences on movement, including individual, task, and environmental constraints on motor skill development. So any factor that affects an individual's ability to learn and perform a skill is called a constraint, and these can be broken into 3 categories. So we've got individual, task, and environmental constraints. Individual one I think is the easiest one to kind of think of. I just think it's about the person, it's about the thinking ability, their body, and their training a lot of the time. So things such as body shape and size, fitness level, mental skills, concentration, all of those would come under individual constraints. In terms of task constraints, I always think of this as something that the coach can modify. So if you're the coach of a a 9-12 basketball team, you can modify the rules of the sport. You can be okay, we're going to play a half-court game, right? Or we're going to play for 7 minutes and then stop. And then play again for 7 minutes and then stop, or switch teams or something like that. So you can really modify these rules. That's something that a coach can do. You can modify the resources. You can throw out 3 basketballs if you want to, just for a little game. Or you can have it played with a netball instead. So you can modify that as a coach. You can also modify team size and number of plays. So if you can kind of see my pen here, all of these things are something that a coach can change or modify. In terms of environmental constraints, these are things which are kind of out of your and your coach's personal control. So you can't really change the physical environment. If you were born in a town where there are plenty of parks and ovals, that's really great. But if you were born in a town without them, you can't really change that on an individual level, right? It's something that's a wider societal thing. You can't control the weather. So things such as physical environment weather include if someone lives in a town that's close by the beach, so I personally do. So a lot of people in my class go surfing, right? But things like skiing would be less common because we're not so close to the mountains and things. So that's something to consider. Societal norms. So in Victoria, for example, we really like Aussie rules football, whereas in New South Wales, perhaps rugby is a bit more common, or cricket or another sport. So really considering these societal things can kind of recognizing how they influence an individual's movement skills or development of their skills. Coaching availability. So this kind of also revolves around societal norms. So if it is a town in which AFL is played a lot, you might have more experienced coaches who do train students in AFL as opposed to rugby or something else. Support from family and friends is another big one from environmental constraints. So you can't really control if your family supports you playing AFL or netball or something. So it's this is also kind of dependent also on societal norms once again. So if you have any questions, just pop them into the chat and I will try and answer them. Okay, so the link between motor skill development and participation and performance. That little VCA 2017 is just about which study design it came from. So this is from the 2017 one, which is still relevant for this year. Okay, so this is it's got a chart in it or a graph. Anytime I see a chart or a graph, I'm just oh, going to be hard topic. It's going to be like difficult. But this is just a very straightforward concept. This will come up in the exam, or it will likely come up. I don't want to say it will, but it's very likely to come up. They like to discuss this. This is more about like human behavior, I guess. So basically, reduced motor skill development will lead to decreased participation in performance in physical activity. What this means is if an individual doesn't actually perform well at motor skills and things, over time, as they get older, they will be less likely to participate and perform in physical activity. And this can lead to adverse health outcomes, such as increased risk of obesity or like high cholesterol or reduced fitness. And that can also affect other things like cardiovascular health, respiratory health, etc. So recognizing that being able to participate and develop these skills early on in life is going to set someone up later on in life is a really important concept. Making sure that you understand that it can circumvent issues such as cardiovascular problems or other diseases later on is also important to note. So if a child doesn't develop fundamental motor skills such as running, jumping, balancing, catching, and throwing, they are less likely to participate in physical activity. And they're also less likely to successfully develop sport-specific motor skills, meaning their performance in sports will be decreased. Okay, so you can also consider social kind of aspects, like sports are often a really good opportunity to make friends, have a team, or like a really good support network. So not having these basic skills initially will mean that you're less likely to participate in these sports later on, and you're also missing out on those social aspects as well as like the more physiological aspects too. So this graph is pretty much just saying, you know, as fundamental movement skills develop, you're more likely to have increased participation and performance levels. Okay, I'm just always really paranoid that's not working, so I'm sorry. It is working. It's good. Okay, so in terms of movement skills, we've got a big dot point about QMA. So this is qualitative movement analysis principles. These are talking about preparation, observation, evaluation, error correction. So I just think of QMA and the acronym PO with 2 E's. So QMA is used to assess human movement. The idea is then to use the assessment to improve the movement in some way, ultimately increasing performance in a particular sport. So qualitative movement analysis may be used by coaches and teachers, among others, to help identify strengths and weaknesses of players and also predict their potential. So we've got 4 principles: preparation, which involves the observer or a coach having a strategy for their observation. So really about preparing what you're going to observe. So thinking about what you're going to focus your attention on, thinking about if you're going to be the only one watching it, thinking about if you're going to use technology such as a camera or something to really hone in on the sport and like see what's going on, or if you're just going to do it by yourself. In terms of observation, this stage kind of involves actually observing the team or the sport or the individual. So it can be either live or digitally. That's the main thing that VCA typically discusses here, live or digital. Try and consider like pros and cons of each. So if it is live, it means you're really going to like focus your attention and just concentrate on that particular player or instance or whatever you're looking at. If it is digital, you do have the benefit there of being able to rewatch it later on. A major issue associated with observation is the subjectivity. So if you are the only person watching it, you might think that a particular performance isn't great perhaps, or maybe it's really good, but someone else watching it may have a completely different opinion. So being able to digitally record this and then rewatch it later with other people can help to increase objectivity perhaps. Yeah. So remember, we've got 2 more stages of the QMA. So we've got evaluation or the diagnosis stage. I personally have never used diagnosis. I don't really know if VCA even, I'm sure some schools may use it, but I've always just used evaluation. I also think it's easier to remember evaluation. Anyway. So what is an evaluation? Well, when a teacher evaluates your performance, it kind of feels like they're low-key judging your performance, right? That's exactly what evaluation is. They are judging the quality of performance in what was observed. So this involves identifying an issue perhaps, strengths, weaknesses, determining how this issue could be resolved, how you could improve, and tactics that you could like use later on. During this stage, something really useful is the use of checklists and rating scales. So these increase objectivity. So we've got a few like sciencey words here. If you're doing chemistry or biology or even physics, perhaps you may have come across these a few times. But you've got the words validity, reliability, and then infrared reliability. if you look at your study design for PE, these words actually do come up quite early on, like before the dot points. There's like a bit of background and definitions and things. So it is really important that you do know what these mean, because they do come up at like just random times. The main one we will talk about in PE is reliability, but validity is also really important. So what is validity? It's really asking whether a test method actually measures what it claims to measure. Okay, so for example, you guys might have done the beep test before. I've actually had to try to phase it out, but when I was in high school, I did the beep test. This is a measure of aerobic power, right? But if I was saying I wanted to measure anaerobic capacity, I wouldn't use the beep test, okay? So if we like set the scenario again, if I say, okay, I'm measuring anaerobic capacity, I'm measuring your anaerobic capacity, now go run the beep test, this would be invalid, right? Because this test is not actually measuring anaerobic capacity, it's measuring aerobic power. So you can see how that's not a valid test. Whereas if I am saying, okay, measuring aerobic power, go do the beep test, that is valid, okay? In terms of reliability, this is about whether a test method produces consistent results. It doesn't mean that the results are like correct or right or what we're striving for, but it means they produce them consistently. So I like to imagine like, I try and catch the tram every morning, and the tram is like consistently 3 minutes early, which is a bit annoying, okay? So it's 3 minutes early. It should be on time. It shouldn't be early. It should be on time. So it's not like accurate in that it's not on time. But it always is early, okay? It's consistently early, which means that it's reliable in its earliness, okay? So that would mean that it is reliable, but not accurate, because if it were accurate, it would come at the correct time. In terms of inter-rater reliability and intra-rater reliability, I try and think of like international. So if you're traveling internationally, you're going to different countries, right? I don't even know, interstate is different states, okay? So interstate, different states, international, different nations, right? So I just think if you're going to different places, you've got different components involved. So inter-rater reliability refers to the degree of agreement amongst different observers, just like different countries, different observers. And so what you can do is you can get all these observers to undertake similar training or use the same scoring system, something like that. On the other hand, intra-rater reliability, this refers to the consistency of scores given by the same assessor. So intra-rater is like, I am ranking the same performance repeatedly. So if I'm watching your gymnastics performance today and I give it a 10 out of 10, and then tomorrow I watch it and I give it a 6 out of 10 because I'm really mad at you for some reason, that's quite a lack of intra-rater reliability, okay? Whereas if I consistently gave you the same scores, irrelevant as to what like my mood was or how I was feeling about you, that would be a high level of intra-rater reliability. In terms of inter-rater reliability, this is about the degree of agreement amongst different observers. So if there's me and you and someone else, and we're all watching someone's gymnastics performance and we all give them an 8 out of 10, that's a high level of inter-rater reliability. We've all been trained the same way similarly, and we all kind of agree that this person deserves an 8, so that's a high level of inter-rater reliability, because it's 3 different people giving the same grade. In terms of error correction, this stage is also known as intervention stage. It's kind of like trying to fix the mistakes. So I mentioned, I'm actually get the laser pointer out. I mentioned in this part, the evaluation, that you might actually consider what can be changed or identifying the issue and determining what is causing it and how you can like resolve that. That's what the error correction stage is. You're actually talking to that person and saying, look, I noticed this was wrong, let's work on it by doing this. So for example, if someone is playing basketball and they're trying to do a layup and they're just not getting it into the hoop, right? You could try and think about what could be going wrong. So for example, their angle of their throw could be wrong, or maybe they're like throwing it from like their chest area, not like up high. So maybe the height of release is wrong. All of these things are something to consider. So just communicating with the actual participant as to what's going wrong and how to resolve that. So for example, adjust your angle by 40 degrees. Something like that could be useful. So for example, during a halftime of a football match, when a coach addresses his team, he's trying to fix potential issues that he observed using qualitative movement analysis, QMA. Okay? So that was kind of a bit of info. If you've got any questions, put them in the chat. I'm going to drink some water because I'm talking a lot. If there are any questions, I'll answer them in the chat right now. So, yeah. Okay, movement skills. Moving on from that, QMA and preparation, observation, evaluation, error correction. Now we're going to be looking at social cultural factors. Okay, I mentioned before that I love English. I actually write a lot for work. I am like a journalist, so I actually love writing. Something I like about this area of study here is that it is quite a lot of writing. It feels kind of like an essay sometimes, or like an essay paragraph, which I know a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, that sounds gross. But a lot of it is kind of like, it's not like you have to think too many like examples or pull from the literature or anything like that. It's more about justifying your argument. So it's more about arguing your point here. So as long as you can kind of argue a little bit, you can kind of like glean marks like that. So in terms of sociocultural factors, these influence skill development at all three stages of learning. Things include, time, self-belief, role models, and religion. So all you need to do is consider what may affect an individual's development of a particular skill and the three stages of learning, and then kind of argue why this may have an effect on an individual, if that makes sense. So it's usually like 3 marks. Often you might get, or 2 marks even, and you might be asked to like justify why a particular social cultural factor can have an effect on a student or performer. So yeah, as long as you can kind of argue your point, it's 3 marks really. Okay, so we've got stages of learning. So we should know our 3 stages of learning hopefully. If not, that's completely fine because I didn't know what they were until I did 3-4 PE as well. So we've got the cognitive stage of learning, then we've got the associative stage and the autonomous stage. It's kind of like beginner, intermediate, and expert. So in terms of the cognitive stage of learning, in this stage, learners are often trying to work out what skills they actually need to perform. Their performance will be inconsistent and of a lower level, and they'll generally ask lots of questions. So do try and remember a few traits here. So things like asking lots of questions. They will experience rapid improvements. They will need lots of feedback, lots of positive feedback as well as lots of advice on how to improve. They may even need lots of demonstrations, and they may need the coach, for example, if you're doing golf, they may need the coach to kind of like show them where to put the hands on the club, stuff like that. So in the cognitive stage of learning, students would really benefit from simple instructions and lots of visual demonstrations. These are really important, as well as positive, consistent feedback. Okay. Okay, here we go. So the associative or intermediate stage is the next stage, obviously. So the individual becomes more consistent and continues to refine their technique. Okay, so they are improving. As a result, improvements are generally more gradual and lots of practice will be performed. They may still ask quite a few questions, but they're starting to kind of get the hang of their own learning and recognize what their errors are, and also like evaluate and improve on that. So practice should start to become more varied and unpredictable. Okay, in this stage, motor skills become quite automatic, which results in performance being at a very high level and being very consistent for the autonomous stage. Practice should become very unpredictable and varied in order to kind of simulate a real game-like scenario. And, okay, I just realized we're like half an hour in, pretty much, and we're still on the first set, so we'll try and move a bit faster. But yeah, it is really important to be able to identify social cultural factors and kind of justify their effect on an individual's training and the development of individual skills. So, for example, here we've got family dynamics. So, if your family is really majorly into like cricket, this may like predispose you into like picking up cricket as a sport, right? So in the cognitive stage, you might think, okay, if I'm going to pick up a sport, what sport should I pick up? Let's do cricket because my family loves cricket, okay? So if your family, your parents, siblings love this particular sport, they encourage playing it, it can be like good for you. Like you think, okay, my parents love me playing this, I'll play it. It feels like a nice thing to bond over with my family. So it is quite relevant in the cognitive stage. In the associative stage, you might need your family to transport you to games and things. Like if you're doing a particular sport your parents are really not into, like my parents, I don't think would have let me do boxing. If they were not keen for that, like it might be harder for me to actually tell them about it or have like encouragement or have someone to take me to games and things or matches. I don't really know much about boxing. In the autonomous stage, family dynamics are unlikely to be overly important, but having that kind of feedback and encouragement and just a nice like family support is a really good thing. So it's kind of considering the effect of the sociocultural factors in each stage of learning and evaluating how relevant they are to the individual performing.